So the falling apart of materialism. The purpose of this video is to play a little bit. You think it's an ordinary Wednesday and you're in your car or you're at your office, or you're looking at your phone in the living room, and it all just seems normal. There's this independent physical reality, and somehow it came into being. It created your body, created your brain, and then somehow through this process, subjectivity was created, and then you started perceiving what you now think is this external, independent, physical, material world. And I remember maybe it was when I first started listening to Alan Watts, and it was a lecture he did maybe in the 60s. And he talked about materialism as a myth. And I think that's a really good way to talk about it, because you'll see in this video, we can't prove materialism, particularly if we believe in it. And so, but it's not a myth in the negative sense. It's more of a myth that helps us organize our perceptions and create stability in what might be a more chaotic reality. And so one thing the material world's got going for it is consistency. If you put your keys down somewhere the next day or the next week or even 10 years, you go back and that's where they are. If you've ever been to Jamaica, then you go back to that place and it's all there where you left it. And so, but that doesn't necessarily prove materialism. It's just consistent with the idea of materialism, because for all we know, this could be a collective dream, and we're all spirits and consciousness that gave the illusion of separation. But because it's one consciousness, there is this one consistent theme behind our experiences. So I just want to go through a few points that help dismantle this myth, or at least turn it from an absolute belief into something that's at least questionable. And the first comes from what the physicists tell us is the Big Bang. And it's just so easy to take this. We say, 13 billion years ago, from nothing came something. Maybe it's 18 billion, whatever. And there's much difference in terms of our ability to conceptualize either one. But where did that energy come from? Because the physicists also tell us that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only transform. And so it seems to violate its own consistency in terms of the laws of physics. And that's one of the most difficult things. What was before the Big Bang? Because there wasn't even time or the laws of physics. And it's not so much that that's a difficulty of the thinking mind. It's just a leap of faith to buy into it in the first place. Now, the placebo effect is something I've talked about a lot on this channel, because when we go back to Descartes and his way of organizing reality, he said, well, there's the physical world, but there's also the mental world. And he was never able to show how these two interacted. And of course, that's the problem we have with the placebo effect. But the placebo effect is so well established. And this is the idea that expectation alone can influence the physical world. It can actually change the results of something actually that's physical, not just mental and mental. It's mental transforming over to the physical. And it's such a reliable effect that if you do an experiment, but you don't control for the placebo effect, you'll get called out and you can't publish. And so this idea of mind somehow creating a physical reality has never been explained. And of course, that was Descartes' failings, but it's never been explained. And that also calls into question the material world itself. And maybe that's not two things, the mind and then this independent physical reality. Maybe they're more connected than we think. When you consider things like the double slit experiment in physics, how is it that conscious observation has a way of altering reality itself? But there's one, and I don't hear this one talked about too much, and it's called what I call the representational problem. And this one, again, it's totally consistent with the external material world. So again, as the myth goes, there was nothing, then there was something. And it's turned into planets, which turned into life, which turned into beings like us and brains, and then suddenly there was awareness. But we've never had direct awareness. And so according to the myth of materialism, there's a brain inside my skull, and it is always indirectly perceiving reality. It never gets the advantage or significance of directly perceiving reality as it is. And okay, so there's some problems with this, because as I'm looking at the computer screen right now, I don't get to look at it directly. There are photons bouncing around, and it bounces off objects, hits my retina. The retina transforms this into neurological language that goes through the optic nerve back to my visual cortex, and now everything I'm seeing is not direct experience. It is an indirect neurological representation created in the visual cortex, if you're talking about vision, and the auditory cortex, if you're talking about hearing, and again, for all the senses. So the brain is eternally cut off from this supposed material reality. Well, that's a really strange thing, because how did it ever figure that out? And so imagine talking like this is the ultimate escape room. The brain is in there. It never gets to really have any contact with reality. And somehow it figured out that it is a brain locked away in a skull. And the whole time it's only known these indirect perceptions. And that, to me, just seems somehow flawed. So if you're listening to the voice in the head, that suggests that there's something else listening. In other words, if there's just a voice in the head, and this is someone maybe having a panic attack, they are so identified with the voice in the head, that's all there is. But one of the major spiritual transformative techniques is to become the observer of the voice in the head. And that tells you there's a little bit more. And so while I'm conjuring all this up about being a brain inside a skull tucked away in darkness, there seems like there's something more to it, or else I wouldn't be able to propose that this is all happening. So ponder on that one. According to physics, and this is a really good one too. So these physicists, according to materialism, their brains trapped in a skull, indirectly manipulating, discovering what is supposedly an external physical independent reality. And what they've discovered is that the very building blocks of this independent reality are not themselves real. And so that's a really tough one for materialism, because again, humans have been trying to find the building blocks of reality for a long time. So what happens when you finally find the subatomic particles and you find the building blocks, but they themselves are not real? And so, why do a video like this? And you might be really pondering that right now. It's to call in question what we call a normal Wednesday. And the whole purpose, or at least one of the purposes of this channel, is a deconstructive process. It is a process of destroying what we think of as ordinary, and then taking that for granted, that we're just these biological meat suits walking the earth. Well, and then there's this independent physical reality that we've been trying to master and control, and it's always been elusive. There's always some other thing that seems to come up that makes it much more difficult. Maybe there's too many variables, whatever. But while we go through our normal day, we take our neighbor's garbage out, we pay our taxes, we have car insurance and all that. It's just to put a little bit of doubt whether any of this myth of materialism has any genuine substance to it.